with that being said, you talked about, and I think I saw it on your website, the idea of better branding. How do you go beyond better branding so that the enterprise has real impact?
It's all about growth. And to grow, you've got to be able to strike a nerve. You've got to be able to understand the underlying problem and frame your solution to it in a way that you become the obvious and only choice.
Welcome, Third Rock listeners, to the Branding Laboratory. I'm your host, Deevo, Chief Experience Officer for the Brand Storyteller and the Fusion Creative Brands. And each week, I have the privilege of speaking with extraordinary leaders and entrepreneurs who are reshaping the way industries work. These conversations go way beyond the surface to explore the core philosophies, the lessons, and the challenges that define the brands that we admire today. And one of the greatest rewards of this podcast is the opportunity to share the insights of some of the brightest minds in business. People who are passionate about pushing boundaries and redefining what's possible. And as I always say, the stories we tell are the brands we build. And this show is a testament to the power of that concept. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to the podcast where branding isn't something you slap on your back, it's something you become. And I'm Deevo, and on this show, I sit down with creators and founders and leaders who aren't just building a business, they're crafting a narrative that actually means something, something that makes sense from the inside out. Today's guest is Jed Morley. He is the founder of Backstory and creator of the Multiplier brand. He has worked with brands that are scaling, acquiring, exiting, and through all of that noise, he's helping them do something simple but powerful. Tell a story that multiplies value, not vanity, value. So this episode is about a lot of things. It isn't just about exits and multiples and messaging and frameworks. It's more about alignment and voice and keeping it real and identity and customer experience and how to stop sounding like a sales pitch or a sales deck every single time you show up on social media or meet somebody, and you have a clear disposition and understanding of who you are so that you can clearly share that, articulate that, and who knows, they might become a customer. So let's get into it. So I always open up every podcast with sort of the shift from career to calling and sort of the inflection points, if you will. And everyone talks about pivoting businesses, but I guess I'd like to learn a little bit more about the moment that you pivoted and sort of ended up where you are now. What was happening before this? Why did that pivot occur? Was there some inspiration? Was there a story from God? Did like an alien ship land? Like, how did you get to the space where you are today?
I was in marketing leadership roles where I kept working myself out of a job. So in 2013, Ben Peterson invited me to join his founding core group at BambooHR. He and his co-founder Ryan Sanders had been building the business for a few years. They had just rebranded to BambooHR and had a new logo. They needed a new story, a new strategic narrative and messaging framework, a new website with new copy. And they asked me to head up that effort. In the course of working with Ben and Ryan, I helped them articulate their brand purpose. We set people free to do great work. And I didn't realize it at the time, but Ben was about to set me free to do great work when he let me know that after I had helped them craft their new story, their new purpose, which they've ridden to great success, by the way. They've grown to over 1,300 employees and over 100 million in annual recurring revenue from the 30 people who were there when I was part of the team. He let me know that they needed to lean into demand gen and lead gen. And that just wasn't my jam. So we had the conversation, the hard conversation over swirled ice cream cones, chocolate and vanilla. And that conversation was kind, but it was clear that that lead gen job was not a fit for me. Yeah. But what Ben did say is, he said, Jed, this brand strategy and storytelling aspect of marketing is your strength. That's your superpower. You ought to lean into that. And I never forgot that conversation. I thought that was a really nice and thoughtful thing for Ben to do under the circumstances, giving me that constructive feedback at a moment where it would have been easy to feel discouraged. And then it was added upon when I worked with a friend and serial entrepreneur and founder named Garen Hess, I had worked with Garen at an earlier agency in my career when he was building a company called Rapid Intake in the instructional design space where you could asynchronously build courses in the cloud. He eventually sold that business and started a new one called Demo Chimp.
Mm.
And Garen asked me to come over and head up marketing for Demo Chimp in around 2016. So BambooHR is 2013, 2014, Demo Chimp 2016. And as I leaned into that opportunity, there was another situation where the reality of the product had outgrown the perception of the brand. To close that gap, Garen asked me to think about a brand strategy and story that would help the company communicate its value to the enterprise clients that were starting to take an interest in the Demo Chimp platform, which lets you create modular versions of your demo that adapt to each person on a buying group or committee in buying B2B enterprise software. And it became apparent to me that the Demo Chimp name was just not serious enough to have the gravitas, the credibility to communicate and connect with enterprise businesses. And so I recommended to Garen that we change the name of the company from Demo Chimp to Consensus to communicate in that suggestive name what the company does. He liked it. He adopted it. We created a new visual brand identity, a new strategic brand narrative, a new messaging framework, and applied it to all of our marketing communications. I even reached out to Pat Spencer, one of the authors of the Challenger Customer from Corporate Executive Board. They wrote the Challenger sale in the early 2010s. In 2015, they came out to a encore serial follow-on book. And in reaching out to Pat, he said, "You've really struck a nerve here. We see a lot of companies who struggle with this pre-sales component of the buying journey." Not only did Pat like the concept, he introduced us to the venture capital arm of CEB. It's now since been acquired by Gartner, and they invested in Consensus. And I remember Garen calling me. I was traveling. I was in Logan Airport in Boston. He said, "Jed, this investment has doubled the value of our company because it signals that we're solving a problem that's significant." And so that was another situation where in the moment I was celebrating with Garen. And soon after that, he said, now that we've got this brand foundation and strategy and story, we need to lead into lead gen. And that's not your jam. So I kind of failed my way to success in the sense that at that point, I realized I needed to look for a way of expressing my gifts and making a contribution that would be compatible with the fact that companies don't need brand strategy and significant strategic story development all the time. So I decided to consult, and I built up a bit of a consulting practice. And with the help of friends like Christian Hansen at Hint Creative and my brother Nate Morley, I was able to start getting some opportunities to consult. And that led to Backstory Branding as it's currently incorporated. And it's been a great ride. I've really enjoyed the process of helping companies and founders communicate their full value at scale.
I love that story. Thank you for sharing it. You said something in the outset of that conversation around, and I wrote it down, branding as an aspect of marketing. And I have to pick a bone with that because I don't see the two in the same silo. I see them working interactive and in symbiosis. And I'm just curious if you agree with that or do you have a different take on it?
I agree with you in the sense that oftentimes in modern marketing, we make a distinction between brand marketing and performance marketing. Mm. And bridging that gap is the focus of my new book, Building a Brand That Scales. It talks about how to bridge the two. I mentioned that swirled ice cream cone in my letting go conversation with Ben Peterson at BambooHR. Imagine a swirl ice cream cone soft serve where you have chocolate and vanilla. Chocolate represents brand, vanilla represents performance. What if you could blend the best of both? Mm. And I think that's the answer. It's not either or, it's and. Mm. So many times we think that we have to trade off one or the other. I really think there's a better way, and that is to find the best of both worlds and blend it so that you're building equity in your brand while you're generating revenue and growing your business.
I don't disagree with that at all. I appreciate you breaking that down. I always look at it from the standpoint, if you market without a clear brand, you're just sort of making noise, rabble, right? And if you brand without marketing, then nobody hears you. So you do need the two. They work hand in hand. But I always like and this is just my take on it, when I work with clients, I always like to put them in silos because I think they need to be built as foundations all to themselves, and then how do we find the connecting point? So I appreciate you saying that. In terms of, and that's a really cool story. You said you said that you failed your way to success. You really more accurately, you compelled your way to success because you were still adding value and solving problems. You just solved too many problems for them that they no longer needed, right? It's an interesting conundrum and sort of like I was thinking about this the other day. Um, Early on, I got divorced when I was in like 2010-ish. I'm going somewhere with this story. And I was thinking about my divorce, and then I got into another relationship after that, and then that failed, and then I got into another relationship and that failed. And I was started to sort of think about what was going on in my relationships. What was I doing wrong? What was my role in this? Because I was like, it certainly can't just always be the other person here. There's got to be something in here. And one of the things I realized, and I'm going somewhere with this, is that I had some unresolved childhood issues around validation, and I was giving all the time in every way, shape, and form. And then, so fast forward to today in my business and early on in my entrepreneurial career in this space, I realized that I was kind of starting to burn myself out because I was just constantly giving more to the client, right? And I always sort of had the idea of like, we should give them more to show our appreciation and show how our value is and make sure that we're like worthy of the check and all these sorts of things. But I no longer feel that way, sort of. And I'm just wondering if you, given all your experience and working in the space, what your thoughts are on that space of like giving too much to a client or over giving, especially if the reason you're over giving is because you're seeking something on your own side.
I think you make a great point, Devo. Everybody wants to feel worthwhile and worthy and appreciated and valued.
Mm.
And I think over time, you build that confidence to know that when you have applied the principles, when you've followed the process, when you've produced a good outcome and delivered the value that you promised, that it's enough and that you're enough. And that if a client doesn't see or appreciate that, maybe you shouldn't be working together.
Mm.
We do a brand ladder methodology that I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with. And ultimately, what everyone and everything ladders up to is validation.
It's funny, isn't it?
It is. So we're all looking for that validation. I think as you continue to practice your craft, you get to the point where you know when it's good. And you don't have to be apologetic. There aren't any other steps to take. You can say, this is the process. We know that it works because we've proven it over and over again across categories and industries and growth stages. Now it's a question of whether or not you'll receive it and trust it.
Mm.
Something that a lot of clients struggle with is they want to know, for example, is it statistically significant?
Mm.
And insights are what inform great branding.
Mm.
And you can't test every idea. There's just not enough time. There aren't enough resources. So ultimately, it comes down to being able to recognize it when you trip over the truth, when you have a moment of insight, of inspiration that can inform and inspire and give direction to an entire brand's trajectory. So behind every great brand is a great client. And a great client has good taste. They're able to recognize the truth when they hear it, when they see it, when it resonates. And that might be from a single conversation, but it's a conversation with someone who has a prepared mind to appreciate the moment and to act on it. And I've come to trust that intuition as much as I like to weight what we do with data. There's moments of truth that break through, and you've got to go with it when it feels right. So validation comes from experience and knowing that when you trust that intuition, it won't take you in the wrong direction. When it's informed by the 10,000 hours of intentional practice that get you to the point of being able to recognize it.
What is that balance between insights, data, and intuition when you're running a business like you do?
We found it helpful to do the work to really absorb and immerse yourself in the business to understand the context.
Mm.
So context setting is huge. A competitive analysis, brand audit, in-depth interviews, and where appropriate, surveys. But somebody has to synthesize all of that. And to this point in my career, oftentimes I've been in that seat to be the synthesizer, where you pour in all of the anecdotes, the fragments, the ideas and insights and opinions, and you reduce it down to its essence. And what I've noticed is by the time we've done 15 to 20 interviews across different customer audiences, there are aha moments that happen almost every time. In fact, I would say every time, because it's never really let us down. Our clients curate who participates in those conversations. We're looking for people who are insightful, opinionated, and articulate. We unlock brand stories and strategies by having insightful people co-create them with us, knowing how to draw those insights out of people who are deeply committed to the category is a gift that we've honed and refined over time, to where we now know that we can make the magic happen on demand. I was doing this motion because I like to say that Harry Potter, when he first realized he had some magic, his wand had a short in it.
That's
Exactly.
my wand right there.
That's your wand. So when you learn to use your gifts and talents and turn them into strengths, you can cast a spell, you can make the magic happen on demand. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, is to recreate the magic for this client like we did for that client. And it's the proven process and the skill to know how to wield it that enables that to happen.
I showed you the magic wand because it's something I ask my clients early on in this market research that we're going to talk about in a second. Is if you did have a magic wand, and I always show them the magic wand, and then I give them magic. And this is custom made. It's an iron forged wand that I found.
Wow,
I know. I
that's
found somebody
cool.
on. It's so cool. I found somebody on Etsy that makes them for me.
That is
And
cool.
yeah, and then we ship them in these custom boxes off to our clients. It's just really cool. Anyway, the question I ask is, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about your story? Where do you want to go? What would you create? So you just wave it, and how do you get there? So it's interesting to know when people think about that. If you could think about your story right now, where you are today, and you could wave your magic wand, what's the ultimate destination for you, for backstory? Where are you trying to take all of this?
We believe in our purpose, which is to build brands that live up to their promise. That's why we wrote the book. That's why we've built the business and are actively scaling it. We'd like to be able
When you
to,
Sorry, let me interrupt. When you say we, there's somebody else involved behind the scenes with you?
yeah, we've got a core team now of
Got it.
five people, and we augment that, and it scales infinitely because we have trusted partners who
Bravo, bravo.
specialize in, yeah, well, thank you. And the core team is helping me standardize the process. We've got it to the point where it's repeatable, and that's what we represented in the book. It was a great process, kind of cathartic actually, to think about what we believe and why, and be able to crystallize it by putting it into words. So the process, the recipe for success is written. Now, how do we share that with more people so that they can realize the full measure of their creation, so to speak, as individuals and as organizations, to have a bigger impact and have a better exit? And that's what we're intent on, is just trying to help more people benefit from the pragmatic approach to branding that we've tried to hone over the past dozen years.
Mm. I met you on LinkedIn, I think. Is that correct? Is that where we met?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
I'm sort of relatively new to LinkedIn. I would say, like, literally in the last 6 months, I've really been wholeheartedly diving into it. I've traditionally played on Instagram. It was sort of I'm a creative by heart, photography business for almost 20 years,
Cool.
until I segued, and storytelling photography, until I segued into sort of more strategy and coaching right now. But I noticed one thing on LinkedIn, and especially in the last few months, completely different than when I first joined. And it's sort of this idea of thought leadership, and everybody's sort of showing up with a story now, and everybody's trying to show up with some sort of zone of genius that they're sharing. And but I'm also noticing something else, and I actually wrote about this on an article this morning on LinkedIn, about this pernicious aspect of letting AI write the story for them. And I'm just curious what your take is on that right now before we dive into the rest of your story. It seems like everybody is jumping on this thought leadership bandwagon, and I love it. But what's that thin, precarious line between actually having thought leadership and allowing a a machine write that for you? I'm just curious what your take on that is.
We believe that the best application of AI is to combine it with your own unique corpus of content. And what I mean by that is, we believe in creating a message library consisting of your brand foundation, your purpose, your position, your promise, your pillars, your personality, combined with audience defining characteristics, your ideal customer profile, your customer personas, along with audience and offering specific messaging, together with your company overview, your one line elevator pitch, your about us statement, the problem statement, pillar paragraphs. All of those elements combine to constitute your message library. everybody should have a distinctive point of view, and that should be encapsulated in the message library and articulated in a way that's clear and consistent so that everybody can communicate on your behalf in a way that's on message. And combining that with AI empowers a team to communicate in a way that's consistent with what makes you different and why it matters. If you give up that differentiation, you're going to sound the same as everyone else. And that sea of sameness is the antithesis of good branding.
I love that sea of sameness. I've used that line before. I like this idea of messaging library. I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. So with what you just said, it sort of sounds like you're a bit obsessed with clarity, right? And I think a lot of people struggle with clarity. And I know I did early in my career. I can speak personally speaking, as I morphed from photography agency to sort of coaching, consulting, strategy, and now ultimately brand storytelling. I realized that I was trying to be a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And it wasn't until I actually changed that, I reverse engineered that paradigm. And instead of trying to niche myself down, I created my own niche of like, this is what I do. This is what I do best. And I'm going to tell that story from that. So my messaging library is centered around, what my core competencies are, my superpowers. How can I add the most value? But in your case, what you just said, you sound really obsessed with clarity. But I think a lot of people struggle with that. It's kind of an irony, like in an age of storytelling and an age of AI and an age of like all of these different things that people could do or say or share about their story. A lot of people don't have clarity on that. And it sounds like you're building your business repertoire around that. Is that a fair statement?
Clarity is king. Yeah.
Clarity is king and queen and everything.
And everything. So once you uncover the truth, how do you retain it, amplify it, consistently communicate it across a team, across a consortium of agencies, contractors, freelancers, everybody who's communicating on behalf of your brand? How do you empower them to do it in a way that's aligned? Alignment is the killer app, and that's what it takes to scale. And what we found in doing debriefs and conversations with clients we've had who've gone on to do great things, they cite alignment as the biggest benefit of the work we do with them and for them, because it is not only an external message that's clear and consistent, it creates clarity internally so that now cross-departmental leaders and teams have a shared understanding of what we're trying to affect in the world and how we're going about it. I saw this symbolized and embodied in a great leader, the CEO of Lucidchart, Dave Groh. When we worked with Dave, this was back in 2016, earlier in our consulting journey, he asked if we could help them deconstruct why Lucidchart's customers were buying their software. And at the time, a lot of customers were discovering Lucidchart on their own, which meant they were buying individual licenses. There might be 150 people at Nike using Lucidchart unbeknownst to one another. They wanted to sell enterprise licenses, and to do that, they had to be able to articulate in a clear, consistent way the value of Lucidchart departmentally. So if you're an IT person, if you're a software engineer, HR, marketing, operations, what is the value proposition of Lucidchart for those specific audiences? We did 70 in-depth interviews. And in these IDIs, we partnered with their UX team. So we had a marketing and marketing communications perspective coupled with product. And the beauty of that was we had a duality to what we were learning. We took turns asking questions, and it created that swirl effect where we had branding and performance in mind. And the result was, and is embodied to this day in Lucidchart's website, you can see under solutions, audience-specific messaging. On the homepage, it's like a keynote speaker. You talk about the umbrella message, the brand or company message. It's as if you're talking to all of the customer segments at the same time at a big customer event. Dave Groh, the keynote speaker, is welcoming everyone, giving them a message that resonates regardless of where they sit in the organizations where they work. And then after the keynote at conference, what do? We go into a breakout session. Audience messaging is like breakout sessions, where you choose a track that speaks to your specific use case or job to be done, your pain point. By reverse engineering what resonated with Lucidchart's customers, we were able to recreate the magic at scale, because now we could communicate in a way that connected with individuals and buyers at the highest levels of these large organizations. Now, Lucid Software, they've expanded their portfolio beyond their initial Lucidchart product. They do over 200 million in annual recurring revenue. And I think it's to Dave's credit and his team, Carl's son, his predecessor, founder and CEO of Lucid Software, because they listen and they genuinely want to care and connect with what's resonating and why.
You have a sharp memory. You're really good at name recall.
Thank you.
You said something a second ago, audience specific messaging. It's kind of funny because I think a lot of time as entrepreneurs, especially as small business owners, that we speak to the audience from our point of view, our perspective, and we're not really addressing their hot points, their touch points, their needs. And you said at the outset of the call, this customer journey concept that you were talking about. I'm hoping you could speak to this for a second. How important is it, especially for small business owners, to realize that, yes, you should understand and be in alignment, if you will, to borrow your lexicon, with what you do and what you bring to the table and what services you have and what problems you solve. But it's really important that your messaging speaks to the person you're trying to sell that to from their point of view. Do you agree, disagree? Can you kind of chat about that for a second?
I couldn't agree more, Deevo, that empathy, walking in your customer's shoes is the place to start to understand from their perspective what the value is that you're providing. I think Donald Miller did a terrific job of reminding us all in his story brand framework that the customer is the hero of the journey. And for companies that have a relatively simple, straightforward story, they sell one product to one audience. I think that framework that story brand brought to light is a great place to start. We pick up where they leave off by saying, what if you have a multi-audience, multi-offering messaging matrix and framework? That degree of sophistication is something that requires a different set of tools. And we've built those at Backstory. And that's what is the essence and the focus and focal point in our book, Building a Brand That Scales. We want to help other companies understand and appreciate what Dave Groh helped us learn those 8-9 years ago by figuring out how do you take a story and adapt it to different audiences. It's like a Rubik's Cube. You have 6 sides to a cube, 9 tiles per side. If you're a green-oriented audience, Deevo, and I show you 8 of 9 tiles that aren't green, the signal to noise ratio is going to be out of whack. So the problem that we need to solve is how to address mixed messages by solving that messaging puzzle and having purely relevant messages for each audience, so that if I find out you're green through qualifying questions because of the content you've consumed and the signals you're sending us as a company, then I know I need to show this person in this relationship that they're forming with our business and brand purely green messages. Yeah. And then I pivot to the white audience. If I wrongly assume or mistake you for someone else, then it's going to be a disconnect.
Who do you work with? Who is your ideal client?
Ideally, we work with growth stage companies that have between 5 and 50 million in annual revenue and are looking to exit in the next 3 to 5 years.
With that being said, you talked about, and I think I saw it on your website, the idea of better branding. How do you go beyond better branding so that the enterprise has real impact?
It's all about growth. And to grow, you've got to be able to strike a nerve. You've got to be able to understand the underlying problem and frame your solution to it in a way that you become the obvious and only choice. I'm going to reference again that book, Challenge Your Customer. Even though it's 10 years old, the principles are still applicable. Pat Spencer and his co-authors said that through their research at Corporate Executive Board, now Gartner, the goal is to lead customers to your solution, not with it. And what that means is, and Andy Raskin has even talked about this in the Bay Area in his work with Silicon Valley startups, a strategic narrative frames a problem. And the way to frame that is to say, the world has changed, a big shift has happened, and it's significant. You can't afford to ignore it. So if you can quantify the cost of not being willing to change, so if the pain of the same is greater than the pain of change, and let's face it, making a change is challenging. But if the pain of the same is greater than the pain of change, then you can make a compelling case for doing something different or doing something differently, which is the essence of strategy. And reframing the conversation to say, the world is different. You've got to adapt. And there's a problem that's too big to ignore. And by the way, here are the 5 criteria for solving the problem. educating the market early on in the funnel as they progress through the buyer's journey, gradually introducing your solution as the only one that satisfies those 5 criteria for success. We call those brand pillars. That's a recipe for reaching and connecting with the right audiences and recreating the magic at scale.
When you were just addressing that piece, are you talking to your multiplier brand system?
Exactly. Yeah. Our goal is to multiply the value of your business by creating a multiplier brand.
I was reading about that. It's really intriguing. I love that you have names for things and sort of like conceptualizing for your client. By the way, I'm taking you to trivia night, man. I don't like, dude, you've dropped more names in one podcast than every guest combined in the last 5 years. So I'm going to TGI Fridays if they still exist on trivia night, and we're taking home the golden onion or whatever the hell is they have. Speaking of that multiplier brand concept, which of those 5 values do you typically see as the one that most companies are missing?
So you need to articulate a brand purpose, the difference you make beyond making money. And as much as we love Simon Sinek and we appreciate what he shared with us and taught us in Start With Why, there's an equally important book that I wanted to highlight because it's sometimes overlooked. It's interesting how sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed this, Deevo, it's interesting that sometimes movies will come out 2 at a time, like Bugs and A Bug's Life and Ants. And the same thing happened with Simon Sinek's book. Not long before Simon Sinek came out with Start With Why, there was a guy named Roy Spence who wrote a book called It's Not What You Sell, It's What You Stand For. And Roy articulated, in my view, a better methodology, a better process for articulating your purpose as the reason you exist, the difference you want to make beyond making money. It's so simple to understand the way he taught it. So I highly recommend that book, and it's tutored us and helped us hone our processing craft. But that purpose is really essential. When I mentioned Bamboo HR, a couple of years ago, we were in a new neighborhood. Like you, Deevo, I got divorced and I was newly remarried. We were getting to know our neighbors. And in the getting to know you process, we bumped into some friends we knew from church. We hadn't really had a chance to visit and socialize outside of that context. So we were just getting to know each other. I said, hey, what do you do for work, Jed? And I started to explain. About that time, their 20-something daughter came out of the house. She was staying with them for the summer, just graduated college. And she said, oh, Bamboo HR. I love Bamboo HR. I said, why is that, Kristen? She said, oh, I love their purpose. What's their purpose? We set people free to do great work. There was no cheat sheet. There was no $20 bill if you can recite the purpose at a town hall. She was into it. So here she is, a Gen Z, very purpose-oriented person, wants work to be more meaningful than just a paycheck. And she had this thing committed, heart, mind, and soul. And she's very talented, very smart, very marketable. And at the time, talent was in high demand. So Bamboo HR had managed to attract a really talented, capable person who is aligned with their purpose. So a well-crafted purpose can punch above its weight because now you're attracting not just any employee, but the right kind of employee. Not just any customer, the right kind of customer or investor or partner. And that rightness propels companies forward. So brand purpose is key. From their brand position, what do you want to stand for in the minds of customers? We've got a P1, current perception. There's a P2, desired perception, and maybe a P3 and a P4 over time, a progression. And if you look at somebody's career, like let's say Will Smith, he goes from high school rapper to TV actor to movie actor to movie producer. And that whole progression makes sense as you look back on it. So if we can think about what does the brand want to be when it grows up, and then make moves that are consistent with that narrative arc. Now, we don't all have the benefit of perfect foresight. I'm not saying it's going to be infallible, but if we can think ahead and imagine where we think we might want to go and take steps, I think of it as like a slinky. You've got one foot planted in the here and now, that other foot stretches and plants its foot. Then you pick up that pivot foot and bring it over and over and over And that progression is how you grow a big brand.
Mm.
It's problematic when you're Jiffy Lube and you realize, oh, there's more money to be had than oil changes. And so they tack on multi-care, but it's too late because by then I've already imprinted on oil changes.
Mm.
So if we can think ahead of how we want to be perceived and position ourselves in a way that's aligned to that, that's a big help. So purpose, position, promise, the overarching value we deliver to customers. A brand promise has a big job to do because it has to say something of relevance to each and every audience. It's transcendent in the sense that it's audience and offering agnostic. It has to be true for everything you offer across all of the audiences you serve. It gets harder to do the more multidimensional your business and brand. Being able to find that unlock to be able to articulate in a simple way is really satisfying, but it takes a lot of work. A client of ours called Security Metrics, the CEO there, Brad Caldwell, engaged with us. And as we started to get to know the company, we understood that there had been a siloed relationship between sales and marketing. Go figure. I mean, that's not unique to Brad's business. So how do we bridge them? How do we integrate them? We included them in the process of uncovering their value proposition. They both organizations contributed recommendations on who to interview. And as we started to uncover insights and iteratively work through how to synthesize those in collaboration with representatives from both leadership teams of sales and marketing and even product, what we realized was there was a complex story to be told because there was a lot of audiences and a lot of offerings. Security Metrics does cybersecurity, so they had card issuers, big banks, mom and pop retailers, and technology. They do penetration testing and all the things you would expect to keep customers' data secure. And they serve a lot of customers, something like over 400,000 customers worldwide. Complex story to tell, 25-year-old business. So how do you reduce it down to something that's a conversation starter? And the unlock was that the common denominator, the through line was never have a false sense of security. So we took something that was colloquial and something that was understood culturally, it was part of the cultural currency, and we've reframed it in context of security metrics. And now there's a point of entry to every story, to every conversation. But it was the result of collaboration. And that's really important as you have a bigger team, because what you don't want is for your brand to live in a deck. And I'm sure you've seen that, Deevo, where you deliver something, you're like, is this going to find its way in the go-to-market motion?
Yeah.
Is it really going to have an impact? And it's only going to do that if people are bought in. And to do that, you've got to include them in the journey. So that's brand position. Brand pillars are something that we've refined over time. It took us a minute to figure out how to incorporate the Pat Spencer IP and ideology into this structure. The brand pillars solve a problem. So you have to be able to articulate the problem so that you know why you need to make a change. And you have to quantify the cost of not making the change so that people are compelled to consider it. Once you've clearly articulated the problem, the enemy, the antagonist in the story, to create that tension that we all love in a well-crafted story for the hero to overcome, then you have the 5 criteria for success. These are their 5 biggest differentiators and the benefits they provide. You can tell your story on one hand with 5 pillars. So regardless of the form of communication, whether it's a keynote, a white paper, a webinar, a sales presentation, how much emphasis you give to each of the pillars will vary by audience and circumstance. You can reverse the order or change it up if necessary, but you want the 5 to be able to have the ability to deposition the competition. No one else ought to be able to satisfy all 5. And like Guy Kawasaki said, the guy who was the first evangelist for Apple, if you want good perception, get good reality.
There's that memory again.
So you've got to have something that's truly different. Paul Gustafson is an organizational design guru and friend of ours. Strategy is doing different things, doing things differently. Sonic is a successful restaurant. They have a really big, complex menu. In-N-Out is super simple. You can order a few things off menu. That's part of the fun. But they want to get you in and out.
Yeah.
They're both successful companies. They have different strategies. So really the 5 pillars is the essence of your strategy.
Wait, I missed the fifth one. Purpose, position, promise, pillars. What was the fifth?
Sorry, personality.
Personality. I missed that one. So back to that original question, because I don't want to run out of time. Of those five, purpose, position, promise, pillar, and personality, what do you find most common missing from businesses you work with?
We find that the pillars are implied, not explicit.
I'm curious about this idea of perception and positioning, because I think perception for me, we going back to that original statement, how can you look at your customer's point of view and tell the story from their trouble spots, right? And a lot of times the perception we have of a company kind of dictates how the volume of the business, right? So if I was trying to alter a brand's perception or you were trying to alter a perception, first of all, how important is it to understand perception, your customer's perception? And secondly, how would you go about altering that if you found that it's just not quite lining up? And that's one of the primary reasons that this company's not scaling or having success.
To understand the way your brand is currently perceived, you got to find out what customers have in their minds in terms of the competitive landscape and how they see you fitting into it. The only way I know to do that is to take time to talk with them.
Mm.
Yes, surveys can give you some general idea, but to do in-depth interviews, I don't think there's any substitute for it.
Mm-hmm.
You uncover the ability to not only understand what they're struggling with to understand or value or perceive about your brand, but why.
Mm.
And it's the why component that's so critical. A/B testing can tell you which execution set, which creative set outperform the other. You have control variables. That's appropriate and necessary, but you need to do the foundational work to understand how the perception is working or not to be able to fine tune it with A/B testing.
Mm.
If you do blind A/B testing, to me, that's like drilling for oil by indiscriminately drilling wells and hoping to hit a gusher.
Mm.
It's a lot better success rate and likelihood of hitting a home run if you find out where the likely pockets of opportunity are below ground and then get below the surface by understanding through in-depth interviews what customers are perceiving and why. Something that's really important is to have enough conversations to understand from multiple perspectives how the brand is perceived and to move people in that right direction. That's the essence of brand strategy. What are the words, the images, the experiences that will change people's perception of your brand? You have to do something different than you've been doing to create that different perception.
Mm.
So that P1 and P2 in between the two is a brand strategy. That's the brand gap. The brand strategy creates the new desired perception. And the reason why it's so important to drive for alignment is it's everybody's job to create the desired perception. So it's a shared responsibility, not just the marketing department.
You've mentioned this why a couple of times, and we talked about the Simon Sinek book, and it's not what you sell, it's what you stand for. I sort of jump in that same camp as you early on, and I've read the book multiple times, phenomenal book. But I always sort of get the impression that this whole idea about why it gets a bit overplayed and because people are people and we all just jump on bandwagons and follow whatever trend is the latest trend to come out, it almost becomes a hollow tagline for me. And I love the idea of like you should understand your purpose, your why. Like why am I doing this podcast, right? It really matters. But more importantly for me, and I'm going somewhere with this question because I believe that a business, especially small businesses, are a offshoot of who you are as an individual if you're the leader of that company. And so who you are personally and how you show up in the world is often reflected in how your business and your brand shows up. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but I find that to be a common denominator. And so for me, it's really important that you understand who you are, your identity, your beliefs, your values, your philosophies, your point of view. How do you see the world, right? Because that becomes for me, that becomes the root of differentiation. So you don't sound like everyone else in that sea of sameness, to borrow your reference. Do you agree with that or disagree with that first? And then we'll go somewhere.
I do agree that you have to be aware. Self-awareness is a big part of effective branding. Who is the company? What do you do and why does it matter? Those are the key questions that most companies and even marketing leaders struggle to answer with any degree of clarity and consistency. And I know that because we've done dozens of workshops where people just can't write it down on a moment's notice. In addition to that, I think if you're in a business that you don't personally consume, then you have to be able to practice empathy at an even higher level. If you're fortunate enough to be your own customer, then that's a different dynamic, but not all of us have that advantage. So I don't think it's necessarily true that your business is an extension of you. I think you can have the business be separate, but being intentional about defining what the business identity is, what the business's value, and yes, naturally it's going to reflect the founder's values and interests. There's going to be a connection there, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that you have to have the business be made in your own image. I think you can have it be something separate from you, especially if you're not a consumer of the products it produces.
I appreciate that take. I guess let me expand on that a little bit. I'm not saying that I don't think you could have success, but I do think that inherently at the DNA of your business, especially if you're a small business or a solopreneur or a small business entrepreneur, that who you are as an individual often is very characteristically imbued in how you show up in business. How do you deal with customers? How do you deal with customer problems? How do you deal with all the different values that you stand for? And the reason I'm saying that, here's the kicker to all of that, is that people, in my opinion, people don't follow brands because of a cause or your why or your purpose per se, especially today with social media and the proliferation of access to everything. I think that people follow brands because of how they see themselves in your brand. How do they identify with who you are as an individual and the messaging you're sharing? And I guess that's where I'm going with that. So whether you agree or disagree, my question is, in terms of you as an individual, let's just pretend for a second that is the case. What's a hard truth about Jed Morley that you've had to come to terms with as you've built your businesses and all these successes and these stories or these failures or whatever it is that you've had? What's a hard truth about you that you've had to come to terms with? And let's say your shadow work that you've had to do around changing your perception, changing your perspective in how you show up in the world so that you could enhance what you were doing after that.
Yeah, that's a great question. The degree to which you're confident in your ideas has to be tempered with the fact that you're working on behalf of someone who's commissioned you to create an outcome for them.
It's nice.
You can't be so insistent that you break the relationship when you bump into a difference of opinion. It's a fine balance because you don't want to lack integrity. And if you truly believe that they're going down the wrong path for the wrong reasons, then you've got to say something. Mm-hmm. And having been heard, having seen them receive the feedback, you may need to adapt to a different way of expressing the idea than you thought might have been the better way.
So be willing to take feedback.
Be willing to take feedback. And sometimes I fall in love with ideas and they become too precious. And so I've had to learn that if for whatever reason, let's say you look into a trademark registration, go to market, and it's not clear. After you consult with your trademark attorney, after you discuss it as a team, you're like, well, we've got to find another expression of this idea, another path to take. It can be hard to let go of that first thought, but you've got to have the flexibility to realize we can find another way to express this underlying idea that will be effective and not lose heart, not lose faith, and don't damage the relationship by pushing too hard for something that's a force fit.
Interesting. Be willing to take feedback. So this is where I'm going with that personal, professional intersection. Because had you not done the shadow work, if you will, to take or to have some self-awareness around your willingness or lack thereof to receive feedback, that's going to show up in how you do as a business owner because you're not willing to address customers' concerns. You take customers' complaints very seriously and personal, so you respond in line, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I was going with that, who you are as an individual philosophy. In terms of your business itself and something that you believe in today that something you've believed in before you've kind of gotten to this point. Is there something you've had to throw out that was an ideology based upon feedback? Like you thought something was a type of way, and then after getting positive feedback, customer insights, et cetera, you're like, you know what? I really don't feel the same way about branding after all. Like this who concept that I'm going to hammer into you.
Adjustments along the way have included letting go of the idea that I have to be the one to come up with the idea. And in practice, it's even more satisfying to see someone else be the one to have the unlock, the aha moment, and celebrate them and the satisfaction that comes from that eureka moment where they connect the dots, they solve the puzzle, and it's clear how to move forward. I really enjoy now seeing somebody else be the one to think of it. And that came with experience and over time.
I like that servant attitude. That's pretty, that's the humility aspect of the humility aspect of CEOs. I'm always blown away because some of the people, and I'm not saying one way or the other, but I feel like a lot of times when I'm speaking to really great leaders, one of the intrinsic qualities they always possess is humility around making sure that other people get the limelight or absorbing the blame themselves if something goes to shit, right? So my question to you, and I ask this to everyone, what's your perspective and your viewpoint on leadership? What makes a great leader and what is leadership?
Leadership is influence.
Mm,
John Maxwell said that, and I think he's right. If people aren't following you, then you're not a leader. And
yeah.
it's one thing to have a bunch of people say they're following you on LinkedIn. It's another thing for a board to agree to accept your recommendation on making a change in the brand's strategy to create the desired perception.
Mm,
And learning how to persuade people who might not be professional branders and oftentimes are distracted and disagree with each other, with you. How do you persuade someone without making it feel like you're demanding that you be right?
mm,
How do you help them arrive at a conclusion that's going to serve them better? There was a case where we had someone who was a really great researcher who served as a city council member for a community that we branded. And it was important to her that there be integrity in the data. So I partnered with someone who does survey work really, really well. His name's Ron Gailey at On Point Insights. He led consumer insights for Coca-Cola for 7 years, lived in Asia. The guy's a whiz at surveys.
hmm,
So we had that component, and that helped to assuage and satisfy this person's need to know that we'd done the work to get the data. And there was this point of conflict. It was a community called Mapleton in here in my home market in Utah. And they had always been a smallish sized community, but had grown a lot lately. We've had a lot of economic growth here, and people are moving in because there are jobs and opportunities. So Mapleton's not the little town it once was. So, how do you bridge between the old and the new? And we were struggling over a technical definition of what is a town.
hmm,
And this individual was saying, well, technically, according to the census's definition of a town, we're not a town anymore. And I said, that's true. But if you listen to what people said in the survey and in the in depth interviews, the IDIs, they believe it's a town. They want it to be a town because a town has a community connection and closeness that's enviable,
mhm.
that's desirable, that's aspirational. They want to retain the culture of a town. So, what we landed on for Mapleton is small town, big heart.
Mm,
And that came out of conversations with two different individuals. One was an 89-year-old Caucasian man who'd lived in Mapleton, was literally born in a farmhouse and still lived there, and an African American young man in his 20s. They essentially said the same thing in different words. They bracketed, they bookended the whole brand strategy.
mm,
We're a small town with a big heart. Now, technically, they're not a town anymore, but it doesn't matter because that's what they want to be.
yeah.
So we just embraced it. And this individual, to her credit, was willing to let go of her preconceived notion that you had to be dictionary defined correct with the town criteria of the census. She let go of that because she could see there was overwhelming evidence in support of the town, and she was willing to get on board, and she gave her vote. And it made all the difference. Had she withheld that, if she had decided to be difficult, it could have killed the whole success story of the project. Now, 3 years later, everybody loves it. She loves it. Everybody's getting along with the new brand, but it was her willingness to support the better idea and not insist on being right.
Open to feedback. When you walk into a room or you got ready for this podcast or with a new client or wherever you go, do you have an expectation or a hope rather of what you want people to perceive you as and receive you as?
I do. Yeah, I hope that people feel and sense that I'm committed to their success and that I believe that there's greatness in them.
Mm,
I want to get the greatness out.
mm,
That's my intent. And if you feel intensity coming off of me, if you feel some pressure to perform, it's because I believe there's something more in you. And I'd like to see you bring that to life and contribute that to society, to your community,
Mm.
and make a positive difference and impact in the world. I just really enjoy getting the greatness out.
So if let's just jump way ahead for a minute, and we're coming to the end of our show here, but let's jump way ahead. If Backstory were to go away tomorrow and the brand disappeared, what do you want people to remember about Backstory and Jed?
That we were committed to getting the greatness out, helping you be the best version of yourself individually and as an organization.
Is that your legacy?
I think the legacy will be in helping people understand how to get clear about who they are, what they do, and why that matters so that they can communicate and connect with the right people to help them realize that in their life's journey and in the world.
Is there someone that you look at today, or a business or an entrepreneur, or somebody who's largely successful, and you look at what they're doing as a business and as a brand specifically, that just gets it right, and you're like, that is how it's done? Is there someone you look at that you could share with us?
I really respect, I'm going to go back to an earlier example, BambooHR, because they took their purpose statement and instead of using it and treating it like an external only message, they practiced it internally. They taught and modeled that they didn't want their employees to work long hours, which was counterintuitive for a startup that was trying to scale. They insisted that people not work more than 40 hours a week. They insisted that people take vacation. They gave people credit towards paying for their vacations.
Oh, that's so cool.
And as a result, they have people that have been with them for the whole ride.
Hmm.
And that continuity is really unheard of today. Most people are looking for the next greenfield opportunity. They hopscotch their way through their career. When you have continuity, think of the institutional knowledge that comes with you.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been able to amplify and multiply, speaking of multiplier brands, their effectiveness and impact because they've kept the same people and helped grow and develop them over their entire journey. So they went from 30 people to more than 1,300 people. Ben Peterson and Ryan Sanders have more integrity than any other founders I know because they lived the brand internally, and that ultimately led to success outside.
Are you going to refer them to me so that they can get on this show?
I'd be happy to make an intro.
Yeah, I ask everybody, if you have somebody who you think would make a good guest for the show and has a message to share, I'd love for you to introduce us and get them on the podcast.
Yeah, I think when people make the unlock, it's the connection is a brand is more than words, it's behavior.
Behavior and experience.
How do we live the brand? How do we act the brand out so there's alignment?
100%. Well said. Where can people find you if they want to connect?
I'm on LinkedIn, and my email is jed@backstorybranding.com. Obviously, our website. Would love to connect.
You get to wave your magic wand one more time. Who do you want to connect with tomorrow?
I would love to connect with Seth Godin.
Wow, that's a good one. He's changed a lot, though.
I like Seth. In fact, for the book, I reached out and I said, hey, would you mind reviewing my book? And I got the impression that it was actually within hours, less than a day, I got a reply.
That's amazing.
I don't have an intro to this guy. I don't know him. There's no connection per se. I thought, wow, who does that?
That's
and
amazing.
It didn't feel like somebody else was doing it. I don't know how or if that's true, but I thought, wow, Seth, good for you. He
That's
said,
amazing.
I'm super busy, man. I don't know if I can get to it. So he's kind, but he's also real with me. And I just thought that was so cool.
I had a similar story, but not the same positive outcome. I asked somebody quite well known a few months back if they wanted to come on the show, and their press agent reached me back and said, basically, you're not big enough for us, man. hit me up in 3 years. We'll see where you are. I was like,
yeah,
damn it. Talk about humility and humbling.
But the fact is, Deevo, that I love is you're doing it. You're not thinking about it. You're not dreaming about it. You're doing it.
Yeah, man, I don't really have, I don't really give any F's about it. I'm just trying to do what I feel is the right thing to do. I don't look at that stuff and be like, oh, I'm not good enough for you. I just be like, hey, let's try it. So thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Jed, I've enjoyed the conversation, man. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and your insights and your robust memory of all the different things that you dropped with us. And I hope we can stay connected after the show.
I'd like that. Thanks for the opportunity, Deevo. Good to be with you.
My pleasure, man. I love this podcast, honestly. If today's episode challenged you in any way, shape, or form and how you think about clarity, or how you think about storytelling, or how you think about branding, or how you think about the who of a brand, or the role of identity and scale and values, hit me up. I want to hear, I really do want to hear what landed about this episode. Just drop me a note. And if you're building a business that actually reflects who you are, that scales without selling your soul, this show was made for you, and you and I should connect, and you can be the next guest on the Branding Laboratory. Until next time, my friends, stay curious, stay courageous, and keep becoming the brand that you were born to tell.
Thanks for tuning in to the Branding Laboratory. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Connect with us on social media for more branding tips and insights. And remember, your story matters. Until next time, keep building and sharing your unique brand story. I'll see you soon. Thanks for tuning in to the Branding Laboratory. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Connect with us on social media for more branding tips and insights. And remember, your story matters. Until next time, keep building and sharing your unique brand story. I'll see you soon.